Are you in?
Yeah, I'm in. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
Hey, Rod, can you hear me okay?
I can, yep.
All right. Can everybody else hear me okay? Got thumbs up there? Excellent. All right. We got some thumbs up. Well, we got about a half hour here before the free Zoom runs out. So we'll get started. I'm Pete Mundo of the HOA board, and appreciate those of you hopping on today to talk about this issue of specifically long-term rentals in the neighborhood. So just to kind of give a little background on this, we've had some rentals pop up in the neighborhood that are owned by LLCs, investors, and we're not talking mom and pop investors. We're talking institutional buyers that have popped up really the last couple of years since COVID, with low rates and things of that nature, a tight housing market. So we've seen this pop up throughout Northwood Trails, and it came to the board's attention. And the thought was, is there something we can do about it? Because it's changing, and it will continue to change certain parts of the neighborhood. And a lot of us love the neighborhood because, you know, we know our neighbors. We feel like we're going to know them for a lot of years to come. And that's what we like about it. It's nothing against anybody who is currently a renter. You know, those folks who are renting in the neighborhood, the intention is to not impact them in any way here. We're trying to figure out what's the best way to do this in a way that protects the neighborhood, protects those of us who have made investments in the neighborhood, but then also does not try to run off anybody who is currently a renter in the neighborhood. So it's a fine line to walk, and we're working with our attorney to figure out the best way to potentially do that. This does not impact Airbnbs. We've already looked at our deed of restrictions, and those are not allowed per the Northwood Trails deed of restrictions. So we've had some of those pop up. Just a reminder, if that's something that you were ever interested in doing, those are not allowed under the Northwood Trails rules right now. So this is about long-term rentals. So Rod, I'm gonna hand you over the floor here for a little bit, and if you could just kind of talk about what you're seeing in other parts of Johnson County, the Kansas City Metro. I know that there have been some neighborhoods that have put bans on long-term rentals, some stricter than others. So what are you seeing here in the marketplace? And then we'll go from there with the conversation.
Hi, Pete. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm an attorney here in Overland Park. I live in Olathe now. My office is in Overland Park. My law practice is almost exclusively working for homeowners associations. And in my work, I get a lot of calls from homes associations in the Kansas City area with the same issues that Pete has just raised. And in my work, I also read a lot and attend national seminars where the same issues are coming up from coast to coast, because there is a great incentive for investors to buy residential properties and keep them long term. There are some statistics, and you can Google this yourself and see what you can find. But last year, according to what I read, about 25% of the single family homes in the United States were bought by investors. And that's a big number. It's gradually creeping up. Now, the same article says that maybe a handful of those, maybe 2 or 3 or 4% of that 25%. Now, my math is not so good, Pete. Maybe 3 or 4% of the buyers that are LLCs are flipping the properties to single family owners, but a lot of the investors are buying them for long term. And my son told me this the other day. He lives in Colorado and works for City Hall, where they keep track of housing statistics. What he learned was that 1 out of every 10 people who leave their starter home or one home to move to another home are keeping that original home as an investment property rather than selling it, because they know there's good return on their investment. And so it's these numbers that are driving the phone calls to me. I also get a lot of calls about Airbnbs, but thankfully we can turn that aside. So homeowners say to me, well, Hoffman, what can we do to regulate or keep the neighborhood owner occupied? And I throw out a couple of options. Some options are, the primary one is just create a document that says any new buyer that wants to buy into a neighborhood has to live in the home for, pick a number, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. The idea is that LLCs cannot live in homes. So it's got to be an individual buyer, a person like that. Then somebody will say, well, what happens if mom and dad are getting ready to go to a rest home, or they want to take a year-round trip around to work Europe and around the world? Can we rent the home? Some associations do create some exceptions for that. It's a hard one to create exceptions for, because once we create one exception, then everybody wants to try to figure out if they can fit within the exception. And so my thinking is, let's keep it as simple as possible, easy to read, easy to understand, and hopefully easy to enforce. The next question is, people come to me and say, well, Hoffman, you've drafted something. Is it going to be enforceable? I tell them that generally judges in Johnson County are compelled to enforce restrictive covenants, because restrictive covenants are a contract among all homeowners. And judges in Johnson County, for the most part, live in restricted communities, and they know this. And oftentimes these judges in Johnson County have had experience where they've had a lawsuit in front of them in their job to enforce a restrictive covenant or to get around one. So judges in Johnson County will look at restrictive covenants very closely and enforce them whenever possible. There are defenses to restrictive covenants. I'm not saying that restrictive covenants are always enforced. It's kind of like trying to predict if the Chiefs are going to go back to the Super Bowl. There are just some things that we can't think of today, that we can't anticipate today, that might cause a judge to say, no, that restrictive covenant isn't enforceable. But that's where we are. And so that's what I've drafted. Once I receive an assignment from a board like yours, they say, hey, we want to do something to limit rentals. I say, all right, here's a suggestion. My suggestion always is, once the board takes a look at it, the board doesn't have any authority to say yes or no. The board just says yes or no. That's something that is worthy of sending to the community. We want the community's questions. We want the community's input. And then we take it back to the drawing board and say, well, let's make a tweak here if necessary or not, based on the questions that we receive from you and others tonight, and also maybe give and take through email or phone calls or things like that. So that's one of the reasons we're here tonight, is we want to hear questions and comments. If I do, if I've overlooked something, or if you think there's something wrong with the work product that I prepared. And the board also wants to hear from you and say, yeah, let's make a tweak and then send it back out to the community. These things can't be done in a vacuum. The amendment process usually requires in every community a 66 or 75% home group of homeowners to sign. And I'm quite conservative about my idea of signing. Because the document is going to be recorded in county land records, I suggest and I strongly recommend to everybody that the signatures of those people that are in favor of this must be notarized. If you are married, that means both spouses must be notarized, most must sign it. But we take those recorded signatures and record them. That way, if I'm not here in a year from now, you're not here, Pete's not here, there's not going to be any question that, yes, it wasn't just a raise of the hands on September 19th, but it was actually quite a formal document that was recorded. And that way we don't have to worry about, well, did we really get 75% or what? How did this happen? So I'm done for the minute. I'll try to answer any questions that anybody has.
So, and just to before we get to questions, I do want to get to those. The proposal that we have thought of as a board based on the concerns that are brought to our attention is to put a 3-year restriction on buying before you could then rent, because that seems to potentially prevent an institutional buyer from coming into the neighborhood. But it would allow somebody who's owned their home for a while, who currently does rent, who does any of that, from to allow them to continue on as is. So we're trying to do the right thing here by everybody. I know it's impossible to do, but that was the thought. Now, on top of that, the other thought here is, how do we make this happen? Well, that's a larger lift, as you heard Rod just mention. We're looking at 66% of the homes with notarized signatures. So we got 450 homes, give or take. That's 300 homes. That's, and by the way, if you have two people who own that home, two spouses, that's 600 notarized signatures around the neighborhood. So this is not something that can be done by the board. We're happy to have a couple of us spearhead it, but we need notaries. We'll need people that want to help coordinate in different parts of the neighborhood if this is something that is appealing to enough people. I put this in the last 2 newsletters looking for volunteers. Nobody has volunteered. So the reality is this won't happen without volunteers. We can have a great conversation tonight. A lot of people can agree with it. We could have people willing to sign it, but without notaries and people who want to help make this happen, there is no way that a small group of us could possibly, or a small group of us are willing to do something that is as heavy a lift as this. I mean, this is something that will take, even with a lot of volunteers, it will take likely multiple months to get the signatures that we need to get them notarized as well. So just to lay that all out there, I wanted to be upfront about it before we went any further. So questions for Rod, if you want to unmute your microphone, there's no great way to do it. So who wants to jump in first?
I'll jump in with a quick question. I'm Matt from the Northwood Trails HOA board, and it caught my ear, Rod, when you mentioned about the potential for someone's parents to be wanting to move to a nursing home. Did you just mean if someone bought a home in here and then unexpectedly within 3 years they wanted to, the buyers needed to move to a nursing home, or what would that circumstance be?
Oh, thanks, Matt. That's probably a poor example, but if we do a restrictive covenant that says if you buy a home now and you cannot lease it for at least 3 years, somebody may say, well, shoot, mom and dad just bought this home and now they're going to a rest home, or shoot, mom and dad just bought this home and they want to take a around the world cruise. Can they get a caretaker in there to rent it from them to keep the home occupied? We can create exceptions like that, but we have to figure out a way to keep them tight.
Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons we've eyeballed 3 years, just for those wondering, is because we do have, and we have had instances of kids who are at the Johnson County Community College renting homes in the neighborhood. So we figure, you know, if you make it a 3-year situation, that would prevent anybody from saying, hey, you know, buy the house, let a bunch of college kids stay there for a couple of years. There's no perfect way to do it, but that's how we've come to the conclusion of 3 years being what seems like a reasonable number. And it will also scare off enough institutional buyers. My concern would be in our neighborhood where we've seen more of this happen, an LLC may take the hit for 12 months if they have to, because the neighborhood is so attractive. You know, our price points in the neighborhood for 4-bedroom homes in Johnson County are still, you know, I mean, they've all gone up. We've all seen our assessments, but they're still somewhat reasonable or fairly reasonable compared to other parts of the county. So the fear is that institutional buyers who are getting pushed out of other parts of Johnson County because of HOAs, if they were to zero in on ours, you know, we're trying to do the best that we can to make sure that they are not attracted to the neighborhood if we go forward with this. So that's how we came up with the 3-year number, if we are able to make this happen. Other questions out there, just unmute your mic and hop on in.
Hi, Josh Goodman here. How many homes are we seeing that have already been purchased by LLCs in the neighborhood?
We got the latest numbers we've got based on the last just couple of years of turnover is somewhere between 6 and 8. Our president is not here tonight. She's on vacation, but she's got those numbers on a spreadsheet. But in the last couple of years, we've seen 6 to 8 of those, which isn't a massive number, but it's enough where some of the neighbors have reached out, brought those issues to our concern, and then also thinking ahead to say, hey, if this extrapolates over the next 5 years and suddenly you've got 30, 40, 50 of these, it's harder to get that 2/3 number as well if the growth continues to happen in institutional buyers.
John Castro here. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
So this would be a change of the deed restriction of the bylaws.
It's got to be recorded. The bylaws only tell us how many directors we have when you have annual meetings, the corporate side of stuff. It's a restrictive covenant. That's a recorded document.
So that's a deed restriction in the deed restrictions. Okay.
Yep.
So you're talking about needing to get, in essence, 600 people together at the annual meeting and have them sign a document they may not understand. Is that what I'm getting at all this?
No, I don't think so. I understand that it is cumbersome, but from experience, what I've learned is if it's important to those 600 people, they're going to get it done. The first one I did was many years ago, where there was a neighborhood in Overland Park that was quite concerned about Sprint relocating its employees from Overland Park to Washington because of the change in headquarters. They went door to door and got it done in a week or so. And one of the next ones I had was a neighborhood of 575 homes where they did have college kids living in one of the 4-bedroom homes, high-dollar home. It only impacted the people on that cul-de-sac. The rest of the homeowners in the 570 weren't too concerned, and so they didn't care. It took 2 years before they finally got those signatures. So it just depends on how important it is to your community. What I'll recommend to you is a couple of things. People can send it, take it to their employment, take it to their bank. You can have a get together on a busy corner on Saturday mornings with coffee and donuts. You can get a food truck in the community with a notary standing by. There are a lot of ways you can get it done if it's important to you.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions? Feel free to unmute your microphone and hop in here if you got any other questions for Rod.
Pete, this is Pat Madden.
Yep.
Okay, is it possible to, what I mentioned a minute ago was the board meetings coming up, to do as a kickoff? I mean, you're having a hard time getting a leader for the gang, and I think you probably would get people that would go door to door and do this. I think that would happen. But is it possible to kick it off maybe with the board meeting this year, have a notary there, and just encourage people to come to the board meeting, say, here, this is gonna be part of it, get the thing kicked off? As the other fellow, the lawyer, said, it may take 2 years to get it all signed, but unless you get some kind of momentum going, It's never going to get going, right? And you guys are doing a tremendous job of keeping that alive, I think.
Well, I think that's a great idea, Pat. And Rod, there is no timeline on this. I mean, if we kick it off at our annual meeting later this year, there's nothing that says if it takes 18 months, it takes 18 months, right? Those signatures, assuming those people still live in those homes, those signatures that are notarized are still valuable, even if it takes us till, let's say, 2025, but we started in 2023.
Yep, you just have to toss out the people that have sold. Let me give you a little bit of a thing that I learned with the community that took 2 years. They were really frustrated because of the apathy. And finally, they got to this time of the year where they said, you know what? Maybe we should offer a financial incentive, not a bribe, but merely an incentive. And so they said to everybody in the community, if you will tell us by the end of the year whether you're going to be in favor of it or against it, and just mail it back to us with your signatures on it, or mail it back and say, no, I'm not interested, we will deduct $50 off of your annual dues. Maybe it was $25. And they got them all by the end of the year because of that financial incentive.
I don't know what the treasurer would think about that, but I'll run it by him. But I like the way you're thinking there, Rod. I think that anything to get people engaged, and I do like that idea, Pat. If we do get a little bit of momentum coming out of this meeting, I think having a notary at the annual meeting is a great way to at least get the ball rolling on some of this for sure. But once again, just to reiterate, it would require, unfortunately, and Rod, just confirm this, right? It could not be one spouse in a home. It's got to be both.
Yes, the documents say owners must sign. And so both of you own it jointly, and you've got to, there's going to be maybe a disagreement or two in the household, but we want to make sure that both owners agree.
Okay. We got about 5 minutes here per the free Zoom. I don't want to add upgrading Zoom to the HOA dues this year. So we got about 5 minutes here.
Hey, Pete.
Any other questions?
Yeah. Hey, Pete, can you hear
Yes.
me? Andy Heron. Hey, do you mind posting your email address in the chat for those of us who do want to help?
Yes, I can do that here.
Thank you.
You bet.
Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Pete.
Nope.
But for you that may have access to it, maybe you can find it online. There was a really interesting article in Sunday's New York Times about exactly the discussion that we're having. The New York Times article focused on a community, I think it was in North Carolina, wasn't it, Pete?
Charlotte, yeah.
And Charlotte. And they went through a neighborhood where there had been a bunch of rentals. And the article just did a real nice job. I don't think it was pro or con. It just explained what this community was doing to try to keep the community owner occupied. Whether they were successful or not, I think it's too early to say. But if you can find that, read it, and might give you a little more background, and find the other articles that I mentioned about the number of investors buying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can get that out there too on eNeighbors when we're wrapped up here. We got a couple minutes here. Any other final questions for Rod? If not, Rod, I just want to give you a minute here to put a bow on this thing and add any other thoughts that you've got to the conversation.
No, it's a tough call. I don't know what I would do if I were in your shoes and be asked to sign or not sign, just because housing is our most important asset and we want to be able to monetize it. But on the other hand, I love knowing the fact that my neighbors are there. They're going to be there when I'm gone. And for example, I was gone in July and my neighbor called and said, hey, can we use your oven for a little while? We've got a bunch of people coming over. It's so nice to have the long-term neighbors. And I guess that's where I'm coming from. I'm not here to tell you how to do it. Just say, from my perspective, it's very, very interesting, and I look forward to working with you.
Mm-hmm. Larry asks how we'll get a copy of the doc. Well, I guess if I get a couple of folks to volunteer and we decide to put together that doc, Rod would basically write that document up for us, and then we would begin passing that around the neighborhood. Correct, Rod? That would be the order of operation there?
When we pass it around, if you haven't done one already, we want everybody to read it, and I want to have them look at it for my grammar and my punctuation, but also for my syntax and for the just the ability to say, yeah, that makes sense. This is going to be easy to enforce. So we want that input from everyone in the community if they haven't done it already.
Okay. So that would be something we'd work on with you, Rod. And then from there, we'd get the official document for people to sign and pass out and things like that.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, that's the plan there, Larry. So that's a good question because we do not have any official document yet to sign. This was kind of the kickoff, excuse me, after putting it in the newsletter the last two times to try to get some enthusiasm for it and, see where it goes from here in the neighborhood. So, Rod, thank you, sir. Appreciate you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to visit with somebody who's got a big mic in their home.
I do a lot of these for various reasons. So thanks, Rod. Appreciate you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
All right. See you later. So I'll just wrap it up and thank you all for coming. And on top of that, Ed, I know we have a lot of back and forths in the neighborhood on various issues, some big, some small. I look at it from afar as someone who's had some of these folks with these concerns bring them to me on the board and say, for all the small squabbling that we do, that's healthy, that's good, there's nothing wrong with that. I think these are the kind of big issues that if we don't look seriously at this stuff, then it's going to be one of those things that I'm not sure it's going to matter